Oh, it's great to be here again. I am joined today with my daughter Miranda. Miranda, can you say hi?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Deadly Regulation.
That's right. Welcome back. Miranda here is going to help me with today's episode. But first, we wanted to say thank you to everyone who left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
You're welcome, Daddy. Mwah.
We really appreciate your support, and we promise to have more episodes more regularly here in the future. In fact, we spent some time off to update our software and equipment to make sure we continue to give you premium content. But enough of that. Let's get started.
Cue the intro.
The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, was created in 1966 by the Department of Transportation Act of 1966. It officially began its operations on April 1st, 1967. The FRA is responsible for overseeing and regulating the safety and efficiency of the nation's railroads. There have been over 2,000 FRA regulations written since 1967. In addition, each railroad company has its own set of procedures that must be followed. As a locomotive engineer, I know firsthand, and anybody who works in the industry knows, that many of these regulations are written in blood. Somebody, somewhere, somehow got seriously hurt or killed. This podcast looks at the events that led to the creation of those regulations. I'm Joshua Smith, and welcome to Deadly Regulations.
Episode 4, The Ashtabula River Railroad Disaster. As we found out in Episode 3, The Angle of Horror, bridges in the 1800s were not the sturdiest structures. In the 1840s, America started turning to other building materials instead of using wood. One of these bridges was a Howe-type wrought iron truss bridge. This type of bridge was a combination of structure featuring timber diagonals with vertical iron rods rather than fully wrought iron. The railroad bridge in Ashtabula, Ohio, was one of these structures designed jointly by Charles Collins and Amasa Stone. So, who is Charles Collins and Amasa Stone? So Charles Collins was born in Brunswick, New York on October 31st, 1821, and he was considered one of the best railroad engineers in the country and actually helped bring the railroad to Ohio. But why is he so important? So keep in mind that the railroad was still rapidly expanding during this time, and Charles Collins was considered the best at what he did. This is important to remember because it will show Amasa Stone's mentality and personality shortly. So now you must be wondering, who is Amasa Stone? Amasa Stone was an American industrialist who created the railcar empire centered in Ohio. He was the director of the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railway. It is important to understand the background of these two men because when it came to building this bridge, they did not agree. In fact, a third bridge engineer, Joseph Tomlinson, expressed concern that the Ashtabula Bridge could not withstand the stresses placed upon it. Amasa Stone fired him. Charles Collins agreed with Tomlinson, and though he was reluctant to do the project, believing it was too experimental. Despite being the best in the industry, what Amasa Stone wanted is what happened, and Stone prevailed. The 157-foot bridge was built between 1863 and 1865 and stood 70 feet above water. It would only stand for the next 11 years. December 29, 1876, the most tragic railroad event until 1918 would begin. The Ashtabula train disaster stands as one of the most distressing railroad catastrophes in United States history due to its vividly horrific details that highlight the tragedy's vast scale. The unfortunate event occurred when the bridge over the Ashtabula River failed under the weight of the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railway passenger train. The structural collapse of the bridge led to multiple luxury passenger rail cars to descend about 70 feet into the frigid water below, which caused an instantaneous and devastating loss of human life. Eyewitness accounts provide detailed descriptions of chaotic and horrifying scenes, where passenger cars shattered upon impact, which resulted in passengers becoming trapped within burning wreckage and being pinned underneath debris. A sudden and total structural failure occurred when the Iron Truss Bridge collapsed without any prior indication as train number 5 approached. Number 5 advanced towards its destination with maximum velocity. The locomotive continued to stay on the tracks for a short period before it derailed with great force, while 8 of the other 11 cars plunged into the frozen riverbed. The survivors shared harrowing tales of how certain train carriages became so extensively crushed that they were barely recognizable, while bodies were discovered tangled among the splintered wooden debris and contoured metal shards. Numerous victims experienced serious bodily harm, including fractured limbs and crushed torsos, as well as deadly head trauma, which resulted from impacted forces combined with subsequent fires ignited by gas lamps that ruptured within the passenger compartments. Operations to rescue trapped individuals faced significant obstacles due to freezing temperatures, which intensified the distress of those who remained alive under the debris or in icy waters. The volunteers who arrived at dawn recounted their experiences of extracting charred corpses together with survivors who were barely maintaining consciousness due to hypothermia or shock. The fire chief, Glenn A. Knapp, otherwise known as G.A. Knapp, was at the Goodfellows Gentlemen Club at the time of the fire call. Many described him to be overwhelmed and quite drunk at the scene, making his decisions indecisive and ineffective. Medical personnel encountered formidable obstacles while treating burns, lacerations, fractures, and exposure-related elements due to the scarcity of resources at a rural site distance from major hospitals. The recorded number of fatalities reached an astonishing level as official documents confirmed about 92 deaths among the approximately 160 passengers on the doomed train, resulting in a mortality rate that surpassed 50% and marking it as one of the most lethal rail disasters in U.S. history. The recorded events of American history accumulated in that moment. An immediate death befell numerous victims as a result of blunt force trauma, while others met their end later from injuries they sustained during their descent or from the subsequent fire. The graphic devastation of this disaster sent shockwaves through contemporary society due to its immense scale and the revelation of serious failures in railroad maintenance and safety protocols during a period of rapid rail expansion across America's industrial regions. This disaster's visceral impact emerged from mechanical failure intertwined with human tragedy, triggering public demand for enhanced engineering standards and stricter oversight to avert future catastrophes. Now let's take a look and dig deeper into the casualties and death toll analysis. The tragic train disaster that struck Ashtabula caused an enormous number of fatalities and injuries, making it stand out as the most deadly railroad calamity in American history up to that period. The number of deaths reached an astonishing level as official reports verified 92 fatalities, alongside more than 64 individuals who sustained injuries. The mortality rate reached alarming heights due to the construction of both the bridge and cars, which facilitated the fire's swift spread after the collapse. Numerous victims found themselves trapped within the fiery debris, where they remained unable to escape due to the structural confinement or injuries they had incurred during the initial collapse. The sudden failure of the bridge structure resulted in numerous passenger rail cars descending roughly 70 feet into the icy chasm beneath. The passengers experienced severe trauma from the fall, which caused them to suffer fractures and internal injuries as well as consciousness. The majority of fatalities did not result solely from the blunt force trauma because the subsequent fires sparked by kerosene lamps used for lighting conditions served to escalate both human suffering and mortality rates. Eyewitnesses' accounts provide descriptions of situations where passengers became engulfed in flames or suffocated due to smoke inhalation while they attempted desperately to escape from their confined spaces. The examination of casualty demographics uncovers that a notable portion of the victims comprised women and children who had been undertaking what was perceived as a standard trip between Cleveland and Buffalo. This demographic detail underscores both the indiscriminate nature of such disasters and societal vulnerabilities at the historical moment, particularly regarding civilian travel safety standards. The medical response efforts during that period faced significant obstacles due to inadequate emergency preparedness infrastructure and limited firefighting capabilities in their community. A significant number of injured survivors eventually died from infections or untreated wound complications, which were common outcomes before antiseptic medicine became widely available. The large number of casualties prompt detailed investigations into both mechanical failures and human factors, but these did not account for other factors contributing to rescue inefficiencies. The investigations disclosed an alarming deficiency in railroad safety practices regarding both bridge inspection procedures and emergency response protocols to protect passengers during train accidents. The examination of fatalities from this train disaster demonstrates that engineering defects coupled with inadequate safety standards resulted in an exceptionally high number of deaths. The tragic event served as a somber reminder of the industrial dangers present during the initial phases of the railroad expansion, while simultaneously sparking public demand for reforms to prevent future rail travel incident losses. So, what exactly was the immediate aftermath and public reaction? Well, this period, directly following the train disaster, unfolded as a tableau of complete destruction and disorder, provoking deep shock and mourning among local communities and the wider public. The period immediately after the bridge collapse saw rescue operations severely impeded by both freezing temperatures and inadequate technological resources, which made reaching survivors beneath the wreckage exceedingly difficult. The eyewitness narratives depict heart-wrenching scenarios where rescue workers faced immense challenges navigating through freezing waters and contorted metal structures to extract victims from those rail cars. The graphic nature of these recovery operations deeply affected those involved, as many bodies were found mutilated or frozen in place, underscoring the catastrophic impact of this disaster.
So, Daddy, is it like Elsa, what she did to Miranda?
Well, yeah, I guess kind of, sort of, but it wasn't magical powers that froze them. It was the really cold, icy water that froze them.
I guess the cold did bother them anyway, huh?
Well, I guess that you could say that. And, you know, what's crazy about that is the public's reaction emerged without delay and reached high level of intensity for good reason. I mean, a multitude of newspapers from across the nation published detailed descriptions alongside illustrations, which drew extensive public attention to this tragic event. The explicit depictions of passengers being crushed beneath collapsing train cars or drowning after plunging into the icy waters managed to captivate readers' imaginations while simultaneously inciting public anger over what was seen as railroad safety standard negligence. The bereaved families who mourned their loss of their loved ones experienced profound emotional trauma while simultaneously confronting an absence of definite information about casualties, which resulted from incomplete passenger manifests combined with disorganized record-keeping practices during that period. The public's desire for accountability from railroad companies tasked with infrastructure maintenance emerged as a direct consequence of the prevailing uncertainty. So, like the great United States of America is, when tragedy strikes, communities come together, and the communities surrounding Ashtabula activated support systems for the victims' families throughout fundraising initiatives and memorial services, which showed a collective compassionate response that carried an undercurrent of frustration about avoidable fatalities. The catastrophic event served as a stark revelation of inherent weakness within America's swiftly growing rail systems during its industrial expansion period, weaknesses that the public began to perceive as intolerable dangers resulting from an inefficient regulatory control. The response from government officials involved in the commencement of formal investigations, which examined both the engineering practices used in bridge construction and the operational protocols railway companies followed. The extensive examination of these inquiries disclosed fundamental design defects in the iron bridge structure, which collapsed under stress conditions, prompting demands for enhanced regulatory controls. The public hearings captured widespread attention, intensifying calls for reform measures to avert future disasters of similar nature. The train disaster's immediate consequences included devastating human losses and simultaneously sparked public awareness of railroad safety. A complex interplay of graphic reports and personal losses shaped the visceral public reaction, which then became the driving force behind subsequent reforms aimed at enhancing inspection protocols and procedures and improving engineering standards to protect passengers from future disasters on America's expanding rail networks. Okay, I get it. You guys are here to figure out how this incident improves safety standards today. So let's look at the safety reforms that implemented post-accident. The disastrous train wreck of 1876, which caused numerous fatalities and revealed major weaknesses in railway systems, actually became the driving force behind extensive safety improvements across the railroad sector. Following that incident, investigations determined that the bridge collapse resulted mainly from structural failure in its Howe truss system, which was exacerbated by poor inspection practices and the use of inferior materials. The results prompted from extensive reassessment of engineering criteria along operational protocols to avert future catastrophes. So a critical reform effort focused on altering and reinforcing railroad bridges throughout complex engineering techniques. So before the accident, many bridges used wooden components with iron rods, but after the disaster, this method's fundamental weaknesses were revealed underneath heavy loads. So as a result, engineers began to favor all-metal bridge designs using iron and later steel because these materials offered greater durability and improved stress resistance. The practice of adopting and adapting standardized engineering specifications for bridge construction spread widely, ensuring that new bridges adhered to strict safety standards derived from testing rather than relying solely on traditional methods. Alongside advancements in structural frameworks, regulatory supervision experienced significant enhancement. The government bodies at both state and federal levels implemented more rigorous inspection protocols that mandated regular, detailed assessments by certified engineers rather than inspections conducted by untrained staff or corporate employees with conflicts of interest. These inspections were mandated to assess not only visible wear, but also internal stresses in bridge components, using emerging technologies such as early forms of non-destructive testing. The primary objective was to detect indications of fatigue and material deterioration well before catastrophic failure would occur. The experience gained from this disaster prompted a comprehensive reassessment and subsequent modification of operational protocols, which were then thoroughly revised. Railroads implemented more conservative speed restrictions whenever they crossed bridges categorized as vulnerable structures during adverse weather conditions, which could exacerbate their structural weakness. The communication systems connecting train crews to dispatchers were enhanced to enable real-time reporting of any unusual noises or movements that might indicate infrastructure problems. The tragic event served as a catalyst for railway companies to develop more advanced emergency response plans through accelerated efforts. A series of intricate training programs emerged for crew members focusing on both rapid evacuation procedures and post-accident first aid techniques to mitigate potential fatalities in the event of another disaster, despite all new preventative measures. The collective nature of these reforms embodies a fundamental shift from traditional reactive crisis management to forward-thinking risk mitigation strategies grounded in scientific principles and accountability frameworks. The influence of these modifications extend far beyond Ohio's borders, setting national benchmarks and greatly improved passenger safety on American railroads during a period of rapid rail expansion. So after everything's said and done, was the Massa Stone or Charles Collins held accountable? Well, actually, following this event, Amasa Stone would actually suffer mental depression and commit suicide on May 11, 1883, at the age of 65 years old. Now, Charles Collins, on the other hand, would also pass away on January 18, 1877. However, his death has been up for debate since that time. So many reports say that while testifying at the coroner's jury, he stated, "This is no bridge of mine. This is the president's bridge," referring to Amasa Stone. "I never mentioned to anyone that the bridge was not mine and that I did not want anything to do with it since it was placed under the charge of a bridge man. I thought it was out of place for me to say anything about it. I never knew of another bridge being built of wrought iron on this plan. I think the bridge was rather an experiment." After he testified, he committed suicide. Or we thought. You see, the public accepted the investigation's results as a suicide. However, police detectives had a different theory. They believed that because the bullet lodged in the wall beside Collins was at an angle, they believed his death was murder. However, they did not look for his murderer because the public sentiment surrounding his death was not much aggrieved. A century later, the murder theory would have been proven accurate by an autopsy conducted by a pair of college professors. Charles Collins would be the last fatality of the Ashtabula train wreck. Tune in 2 weeks when we release the next episode of Deadly Regulations, when we look at the Mud Run disaster, a train versus train incident that happened on October 10th, 1888. We'll talk to you then.
Comment below how you like our podcast and subscribe. Love you. See you next time.